everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Hold My Flashlight, where I tell your tales of true crime, paranormal, and the unexplainable. Our first story comes from Reddit user BEA_RNFNR, titled, "A Random Guy Threatened Me on the Train." I am a 22-year-old girl from Spain. I'm very used to using public transportation, go basically everywhere, and it's not unusual to have some weird or creepy interactions with people, mostly men who randomly start to tell you about their lives and how sad they are. I usually just nod and politely smile until I can go another way, and I try to be very nice and polite because I am terrified of offending a crazy dude in case they do something. It had worked every time, unfortunately many times. However, this encounter in particular left me pretty shaken. I was on the train coming back home, and it was about a 40-minute ride. I usually just wear my headphones, but that day I decided I would just spend that time reading some random novel on my phone. It wasn't even dark out yet, so I was fairly calm. The wagon was mostly empty, except for a guy and a couple behind me, but I didn't pay much attention to any of them because I get really focused when I enjoy a novel. The first 5 or 10 minutes were uneventful, until I saw that guy from before get up and change his seat to one that was oriented towards me. Not immediately in front of me, but maybe 2 seats ahead, looking in my direction. Again, I didn't pay much attention, and I kept doing my thing. Then I hear the guy mutter some words. At first, I thought he was talking on the phone or something, but when I looked up, he was looking straight at me and didn't take his gaze away when I made eye contact. It was only then when I realized what he was saying. He was insulting and cursing me, repeatedly and nonstop in a very low voice, but not so low that I couldn't understand. The insults ranged from bitch, whore, stupid, to much more colorful Spanish insults that I don't think even have a translation. I got paralyzed. Why was this guy cursing me? I had done nothing to him. I had barely even looked at him. I thought maybe I had pulled a face or something in the beginning, but I had my mask on, so I couldn't have. I began to panic a bit, as I didn't know what to do. It only got worse when the other couple that were in the wagon got off. So now it was only the 2 of us. I thought about getting off the train too, but we were positioned in a way that made it impossible for me to move anywhere without walking right beside him, and I didn't want to get that close. I decided to ignore him, pretend I was not hearing him, and see if he would get tired and stop. But no, he just kept going. It was the creepiest thing, because he was barely stopping to breathe between his insults. He just kept going, repeating the same things over and over again in a menacing and threatening tone, with hate in his words and in his eyes, always looking right at me even though I tried my best not to look back. Then things just got worse. He started mixing physical threats amongst his insults. "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to bash your brains in." That's when I really started to freak out. Insults were one thing, but I felt this was escalating. I started messaging my friends and my boyfriend, telling them the situation. My boyfriend tried to call the train security phone, but there wasn't much they could do. I didn't dare call them myself because I didn't want the guy to know I was calling for help. I also wanted to cry so bad, but I didn't let myself because I didn't want to encourage him by letting him see he had an effect on me. For some reason, he moved. He changed seats to the one that was behind me. I got out of the train at the next station. I kept looking behind me, fearing he would follow me and act on his threats, but I didn't see him anymore. One of my friends picked me up in his car and he took me home. The whole ride I was shaking and crying and kinda laughing hysterically because I couldn't understand what had happened nor why. I got paranoid for a bit thinking he would somehow follow me, but I haven't seen him again since then. The worst part is that I was scared of using public transportation for a couple of days after that. I was so frustrated that a fucking weirdo could have that effect on me, and that he had done that to someone he didn't even know. I kept thinking, what would have happened if I had been wearing my headphones and hadn't realized what he was doing? I would have gotten off on my stop like normal. Would he have followed me? The train station where I usually stop was in a pretty shady area, and I still get creeped out when I think about what could have happened if we had been alone there. I'm even shaking a bit just thinking about it. Our next story was given to me by Reddit user LawyersGubsyMoney90, titled Mimicking Ghost. We bought our house a few years ago and didn't start having any issues until about 6 months in. The house itself was built in 1970, so it isn't too old, but there is a small graveyard containing 6 graves in the backyard. The first thing that happened was small, and I didn't think much of it. The kids were all outside, but I clearly heard one of them saying from across the house, "Mommy?" I walked over to the other side and didn't see anyone. Called out a few times and went back to ask my husband if he heard anything. He said he hadn't, and I figured I just imagined the whole thing. A few weeks later, the kids were all at school and I was alone in the house. This time I heard a child laugh. It sent chills down my spine and I was terrified. I checked through the other side of the house again, and again there was nothing. I texted my husband as he was at work. He said it was creepy and to avoid that side of the house. A long time passed before it happened again. This was about a month ago and the worst mimic yet. I was alone in the house watching TV when I heard my husband's very distinct clearing of his throat, followed by a cough. The sound came from the basement, which follows the whole length of our house, and it came from the same side of the house that I had heard the other mimics before. I freaked out and called him, and he basically told me to leave, afraid someone had broken in. But the thing is, it was his voice. It was the exact same way I hear him clearing his throat every day. Identical. Either I'm losing it, or we have a mimicking ghost. Well, now we're moving, and the house has been going absolutely nuts. I was at the house alone earlier today, packing a few things in the kitchen into boxes, when I heard 2 distinct meows coming from the bad side of the house. I thought nothing of it at first, as we have 2 cats, but then realized that I had already moved them into our apartment. There isn't any open access inside, but I checked around the bad side of the house just in case and could find no evidence of any cats, kittens, or other animals living there. After I couldn't find anything, I went back to packing things up and ignored it, as I've ignored the weird happenings in the house before. As I was putting some food into a bin, I heard a cough, followed by muffled talking in the basement. Again, coming from the bad side of the house. I decided that was enough packing for today and noped out of there, and am currently in bed with my cats at our new place. Our third story came to me from Reddit user TheBartender89, titled Creepy Lyft Driver. I live in a city with a public transportation system. They have been extremely short-staffed, and more often than not, you have to call to make sure your bus is even coming. On weekdays during business hours, the public transit operator will order a Lyft driver for you to get you to work if your bus isn't showing up, or if they're short a driver. It's a Tuesday, and I'm at the bus stop after checking multiple times if my bus is coming, only to find out that it wasn't. They ordered me a Lyft, and this nice older gentleman was my driver. We had casual conversation, and he started to ask personal questions. I'm a bartender, and I'm super friendly already, so I didn't think his questions were ill-intended. I told him I'm not married, and that I'm pretty much a loner. I basically go to work and go home and spend time with my family. He then says, "I'd marry you in a heartbeat." Again, I'm just thinking he's being funny or nice. I asked him to drop me at the downtown grocery so I could pick up some things I needed for work. When we stop, he said he was joking and that he's married and he has a son my age. And then he asked if I was interested in maybe meeting him. Since I have a terrible track record, I figured it wouldn't hurt meeting someone out of my circle and comfort zone, so I gave the man my number and we parted ways. The next morning, he texts me and asks if I needed a ride to work. I told him he didn't have to do that, and that I was sure my bus was running. He said it would be his pleasure, and he picked me up at my house at 3 p.m. Then about an hour later, he asked if I wanted to have lunch with him before work. I told him I was busy and that I couldn't do that. He said, "Okay, see you at 3. He shows up at 3 and lets me know he's outside. While I'm finishing getting my things together, I open the door and he's starting to walk up my stairs to my house. I told him I was ready and we could head downtown. When I get in the back seat, he turns around and says he has a confession. He told me, from the time I took off my mask, his heart danced like a butterfly. He said that he hasn't been able to stop thinking about me since the day before, and that he'd love to spend time with me, and that he'd pay me for my time if I spent a day with him. That's when I started to feel super uncomfortable. The whole ride was making me cringe, but I know when you're in a situation like that with a predator, playing nice is safer than freaking out. He continued on the entire ride about how he loved me at first sight and wanted to make me his Lebanese queen. As we get closer to downtown, I started to feel relief. He dropped me off at my hotel and said, "See you tomorrow." That evening at work, I checked my phone after a busy happy hour, and he's texted me a couple times. He sent me a picture of the hotel and said he'd wait for me to get off to give me a ride home. I told him I already had a ride, but thank you anyways. Tuesday morning, I'm out running errands with my mom and sister. He texts me and asks how early he can pick me up because he can't stop thinking about me. I asked him to please stop and that I was with family. He continues to text me all day and evening, begging to see me, telling me his heart is aching to see his Lebanese queen. I just kept saying, "Please stop." Friday morning, the shit hit the fan. He tells me he loves me no matter what. He said, "I told my wife about you and that I'm in love with you and want a divorce." I told him to please don't do that and that it wasn't right to treat his wife that way. He said it wasn't my fault. They were drifting apart anyways. Then he said, "I'm picking you up for dinner at 5:30 and I'm not taking no for an answer." I ignored the messages and just went about my off day. Around 5:25, my video doorbell rings and he's standing on my porch for at least 15 minutes. I told him I wasn't home and that he should leave. He continues to text me and begs to come to pick me up from my parents. I was home the whole time, but was too scared to let him know that. I eventually called the non-emergency police station, but he had already left by the time I got through. I filed a general report, but technically they can't do anything unless he's standing on my porch threatening me. They advised me to report through Lyft, so I did. And I haven't heard anything since then, but the shit was just so creepy. Our fourth and final story comes from Reddit user Valkyrie5672, titled, "The Shadow at My Cabin." To what I experienced, I think it was maybe around 3 years ago. I remember it was winter because it was really cold and snowy outside. I was left alone in my family's cabin while the others went Christmas shopping for food and some last-minute packages for some friends or something. I don't really remember why they went out, but that's not so important. My point is, I was alone in our cabin playing games on my phone while listening to some music on the radio in my room, which was on the first floor of the cabin. I remember that I suddenly got cold. Just when I was about to get up and grab the blanket, I saw some kind of shadow in my side vision. I didn't really react that much, because I thought that maybe it was just my imagination playing a trick on me, because I didn't really like being alone in general, especially not in a cabin on a mountain in the middle of nowhere in winter. I got the blanket and went back to my room to play some more games. About an hour had passed, and I had forgotten all about the strange shadow, but then I saw it again. And this time it stayed in my side vision for about 3 to 5 seconds before it went away. I got a little creeped out about it, since I was the only one in the cabin at the moment, and therefore I decided to lock the door to my room. Right after I locked the door to my room, I heard some kind of crying upstairs on the second floor of the cabin. At first I thought it was my little sister, who was about 3 years old at the time. She used to cry a lot, and I asked out loud, "What's wrong? Did you hurt yourself?" I heard her answer,
"Yes, I was playing with my dolls. Can you come upstairs and help me?"
I unlocked my door and headed towards the stairs when it finally hit me. I was alone in the cabin, so whatever the fuck was upstairs could not be my little sister. I sprinted out of the cabin wearing only a t-shirt and my dad's slippers, and it was freezing cold outside. I stopped running about 150 meters away from my cabin and looked at it from a distance. In one of the windows on the second floor, I could see a shadow just standing still, and I got the feeling it was staring at me, even though I could not make out any eyes. I stood there outside of my family's cabin in the freezing cold for maybe about 30 minutes and cried until my family finally arrived. My mom and dad asked me what was wrong, but I didn't want them to think I was crazy, so I just made up a story. I don't remember what I told them, but they seemed concerned about me. One thing I remember is that I talked my mom and dad into driving me to my grandparents' cabin because I refused to enter ours. Ever since that day, I refuse to join my family when they go to that cabin. It's really hard to explain, but the feeling I got that day can only be described as not wanted. Like someone or something wanted to harm me, and I have nightmares about the shadow figure, even today. It's haunted my dreams. As our evening comes to a close, I would once again like to thank everyone for sticking around this far. If you have a story of your own that you would like to share, you may email it to me at holdmyflashlight@gmail.com, or you can join our subreddit, r/holdmyflashlight, and share your stories there. You can also follow me on Twitter at HMFstories. And if anyone is particularly interested in helping this podcast grow, you may find me on Patreon and join Hold My Flashlight. Well, that's all I have for y'all this evening. Good night.